Hey guys, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the CNH Rugby Pod with myself, CNH. And yep, this is a long time in the making. Hopefully, this is the first of many I get to do, and it's on the top 14 predictions I released not too long ago. So I'm kind of whole new to this podcast recording stuff, and it's very exciting, obviously, because I kind of finally get to talk I get to speak about stuff rather than just typing it out on a computer or on a phone. And I think the way I'm doing it now is much better because I get to talk about it a bit more. Especially now with my top 14 predictions, you may have seen on the Instagram at CNH Sports. I released my top 14 predictions for the upcoming season, which starts in September 4th, I believe it is. And I want to give context or some explanation to my predictions because some of them will have surprised you, such as why I think Castres are going to finish so low, or why do I think Bordeaux Begles are going to finish so high. And I'm basing this off statistics, performance in recent seasons, such as the latest matches they've played, and the overall squad that they have, the recent transfers they make. I'm not going to talk about the style of play because obviously I know that for some teams like Racing and Toulouse, it's fairly obvious what type of rugby they play. But for others like Pau and Brive, not as familiar. And if I was to do that, I'd be here all day. This podcast is probably going to be long enough. I'm talking about 14 teams here and where they're going to finish. So that is something I might do in another video, but that's only if I can maybe do it with someone else so they can, give their contribution to it so that it's not one-sided. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into my top 14 predictions. Starting off in the relegation zone, we have Section Pole or Pau. So the reason why I say Pau are going to finish in 14th is because they've been dabbling with the prospect of relegation for quite some time, if you know. They finished 12th in the last two seasons. They finished 11th before that. Pau have been a real yo-yo team in the French rugby system since the turn of the century. They've been going up and down between the Pro D2 and the top 14. And I think they're due a relegation now at any point. I mean, they were at one stage in the relegation zone last season. They just about managed to get out of it. Or 2 seasons ago, back in 2019-2020, I think it was in the final few weeks they were in the 13th, 14th, just about managed to escape it. One of the things why I think Pau are going to be relegated is they never seem to wrap up a game quite well. They can score tries compared to Brive, who are next, but it's never enough. They always seem to falter. They always seem to let the opposition run in just more tries, and they're quite an ill-disciplined side. I think they were among the top sides for getting yellow cards. One thing I will say that does bring a bit of positivity into this is they have made a good few new signings to try and shake up their game-winning formula, such as bringing in Zach Henry from Leicester Tigers. Obviously, Leicester on the rise, and Zach Henry was at the forefront of all their success. Jack Maddox from the Waratahs and Steve Cummins from the Melbourne Rebels. But to bounce back on this, they lost Elton Jantjies. He's gone over to Red Hurricanes, I believe, in Japan. And they didn't even get to use Jantjies, which I think is a bit foolish because, he's there with Pollard and Morenstein for Springbok kickers, and he was recently on the Lions tour. Obviously, he was a sub, he was 22, but even still, to be in that squad alone is a huge achievement, and they didn't use him as much as they did. The player they did use instead was Antoine Hastoy, and although I would have liked to see Jantjies play more, Hastoy did, he stepped up to the mark. He got 262 points. He was the top point scorer in the top 14 last season, so that is a huge achievement for him. And if he can... But I do think that's the best he's going to get as an out-half for Pau. I don't think he's going to have as much of an impressive season this season because what he does rely on is getting penalties and benefiting off teams' ill-discipline. And he is fairly consistent, but 262 points is a huge record, but I don't think he's going to get as close to that this season. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about Pau. They obviously have Challenge Cup, but they're not going to take that seriously. But even still, I think relegation for Pau is fair enough. And I do think it will benefit them in the long run if they do want to come back to the top 14. They need to take time to rebuild themselves in the Pro D2. Face teams in the Pro D2 who are more like them, more at their standard before coming back up. And I'm not really sure I can ever see in the near future Pau being a regular top 14 team or one that goes more than 4 to 5 seasons in the top 14. No, I think they're like Worcester Warriors. They'll always kind of remain a yo-yo team unless somebody goes in there and just absolutely shakes up what they do. So that's all I have to say about Pau. So moving on to 13th, we have CA Brive. Another team who were on the prospect relegation, finished 11th last season. So essentially, I've taken Agen and Bayonne out of the equation and dropped Pau and Brive down because they were next to be relegated. But also Brive have finished 10th, I believe, the season before that. So they've been in the low to close to relegation zone for quite some time. And they scored the fewest amount of tries in the season after Montpellier. But one thing they do have, like if I talk about what they have to offer, they do have one of the heaviest packs in the top 14. They have many Georgians in their team, and obviously Georgians in general are just really heavy. I think their average pack weight is 928 kgs or kilograms, which, if you think about it, any time it crosses 900 is when you get a heavy pack, because that's over, that's kind of over 100 and like over 110 between each player. So I mean that is something they have, so they can make use of that, especially in malls, because it will be hard to take them down. Another prospect they have is Tebo Abshanze. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Tebo Abshanze from Georgia. He's their starting kicker. Very consistent. He did impress me a lot in the Autumn Nations Cup, if only he got a bit more penalties. But he's still really consistent. I remember whenever I did a Game and Focus on Brive, he was generally getting 70-80% kicking accuracy in most games, which is, I mean, that's fairly good going. They also have Stuart Olding, former Ulster player. He's still got it, not exactly as good as he used to be when he was at Ulster. But he got 16 tries since he arrived at Brive in 2018. That's a good record to have. I don't think he was among the top try scorers last season, but the seasons before that he was. And one thing that did shock me about Brive, though, is they had a bit of a fight back in late December, early January of 2020-2021, because they did get a win over Toulon and Bordeaux, albeit barely, which that does impress me. I mean, they're among the bigger teams and they managed to get a win over them. But they were taking advantage, I think, of the fact that they were missing players to the Champions Cup. But all that being said, I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot of positive things about Brive, certainly more than Pau. But I just think that the cons outweigh the pros in that they're looming around relegation for quite some time. The opposition that are coming up from the Pro D2, along with the higher ranked teams, might be too much for them. I think they did have a fight back last season, but I think they're not going to have it this season. That's going to be it. I think they're going to lose the run of themselves, and we'll know obviously by November or December whether Pau and Brive are going to be the relegated teams. So the way it works in the top 14, if you're not familiar, is 14th is automatically relegated, which will be Pau in my predictions. But Brive finishing 13th, it's a relegation playoff. They play off against the runner-up in the Pro D2. So do I think Brive will win that playoff and stay in the top 14, or will they lose it and go to the Pro D2? Really just depends on their opposition. Even like with Perpignan and Biarritz coming up, there's still teams like Grenoble, Oyonnax, Arlac, even Rugby Club Van. They were doing fantastic for some time, and I actually genuinely believed last season that they could make it, get their first top 14 appearance. They're getting stronger each time, and they're getting good wins over the lower ranked teams of the Pro D2. And many of them are ready for top 14 action. So that's something Brive are going to have to take into account. If they are falling into the relegation zone, they'll have to prep for that, and never underestimate it. Obviously, at that stage, I mean, if you're in relegation, you're going to pull all the stock to survive. But I really don't know. I can't wait to find out who they do face if A, Brive are in 13th, and B, we know the opposition. So yeah, that's something I'll talk about probably in another video. Now we're going to move out of the relegation zone into what I call the Challenge Cup, lower league of the lower half of the table. And in 12th, I have USA Perpignan. So this was an unusual pick for me because Perpignan were kind of... in many of our followers were saying, Perpignan finished top half of the table, get a Champions Cup spot. I think I even had one guy who said they finished top 4, which that's very ambitious for Perpignan, and I'll tell you why. Because even when they were in the Pro D2, they were never always on top. It was Van. They only found their form late in the season. They obviously had a lot of wins, but some of them were, by the skin of their teeth. There wasn't much separating the teams. And I think they got just lucky that they finished first and got to the top 14. Obviously, they beat Biarritz well in that final to claim the top spot. But even still, they weren't as convincing in the Pro D2 as Van were for me. That's just my opinion. They have made some interesting signings. They've got Tevita Kavubati, the Fijian. He appeared on our latest transfers, I think, not too long ago. Baptista Del Goy from Argentina, and Melvin Jaminet, I believe, in the fullback. So, they have made some signings. The biggest problem with Perpignan is they're quite an old squad. Some of their top players, like even Jaminet and they're really old. Like the average age, I took an average age among their internationals. They're kind of around the 30.5, 31 years of age. So it's a little concerning because they could be slower, certainly. But also the fact is that, are they developing the youth? Are they developing their youth academy well? And will they bring in some, fresh blood into the team? Because if not, they will not last more than 2 seasons in the top 14. That's just it. We're seeing young players coming through for Toulouse and Toulon and Montpellier all the time. Whether it's and Stade Francais, whether it's with Perpignan, no, not really. They're quite an old team. I think as well as that for Perpignan, they're past their golden era. One follower actually hit me up and said, could you imagine if Perpignan had the likes of Henry Tuilagi and Dan Carter back? And when they had Dan Carter, they actually managed to win the top 14, which was kind of like a Connacht Pro 12 sort of shock, because Perpignan are not among the big squads in France. So that did, but I think, they are past that golden era, and I think they are just as much of a yo-yo team as Pau or Grenoble or whatever. So I'm pretty confident in the 12th prediction. I don't think they are, to much of my followers just made, they're not going to be a Champions Cup side anyways for a few years. They bring in the one thing I will say is if they bring in more young blood, and if they do get some big wins, they can advance on that and try and rise to the top half of the table, but I just don't see it for now. So, moving on from Perpignan, we have Castres Olympique in 11th. This is one of 2 really bold predictions for me. The reason why I say this is because Castres, they're a mid-table team. Last season they came 7th after a really impressive second half to the season. But they usually, in the last few seasons, I've taken average, they're between 7th and 10th in the table. They're Champions Cup, Challenge Cup, in and out between those 2 competitions, in the middle to lower half of the table. They do have a lot going for them now. They have Santiago Arata as their starting scrum half, who's already put up a huge performance for them since he signed for them after leaving Penarol in Uruguay. And you might remember Arata, if he doesn't come to mind immediately, you might remember as the small scrum half who made that fantastic breakthrough try in that Uruguay-Fiji match in the Rugby World Cup, where Uruguay beat Fiji 30-27. One of my favourite upsets in rugby ever, across club and test. I mean, he just absolutely took off. So he has speed despite how small he is, and he does have skill as well. Even when he's quite an entertaining player. I think in Penarol's first match he managed to block down a kick from the Selknam out half, and it just bounced along the ground, and he managed to do a backflip to get the try. It was actually incredible. It just looks so... I mean, he finished in style, that, so I'm really excited to watch more of him, really. The other one is Benjamin Erdepelita. I believe he was 3rd in terms of top point scores for the top 14 last season. He got 212 points in about 17 or 18 games. That is quite a record. And he doesn't get called up to the Jaguars squad, the Pumas squad anymore. Sorry, not Jaguars, Pumas. Which is good because Cass can take advantage of that. He's a consistent kicker, and he's not going to falter anytime soon. But my main problem with Cass is why they might falter a bit and fall to 11th is that they may focus too hard on the Champions Cup. They're one of the few French teams well, they're one of many French teams that focus on European rugby. There are those who do, and there are those who don't. Castres are one of the ones who really take the Champions Cup seriously, which I think is pointless because, as far as I'm concerned, they're drawn against Munster and Harlequins. I could be wrong in saying that, but that's, I believe, who they were drawn against back when they did the draw last month. And I just don't think it's going to be worth contesting that draw. Yeah, I was right, Munster and Harlequins. I mean, you got the Premiership winners and you got the usual runner-ups in the Pro 14. I just don't think it's worth it. And if they don't focus on it, they can go higher. But I'm under the presumption that they will. That being said, though, they can perform. They got a shock win over both Toulouse and La Rochelle, the eventual champions and runners-up. So that's something they can be proud of. But what I do forecast for Castres is a Newcastle Falcon-like scenario where they will take a nosedive midway through the season. I think they will get some early results, which will, it might look like they're really proving me wrong, but I think they will eventually run out of steam and, slump down the table. A bit like what happened to Pau last season, even though I don't think they're going to fall as low as Pau by my predictions. No, I think they will miss out on Champions Cup, and 11th, it's not ideal, but that's just where I see them. I mean, at the end of the day, there are winners and losers in this. I can't say everyone's going to finish in the Champions Cup spot because it's so competitive in the top 14. You have no idea. If this is your first time going to watch the top 14, you will not be disappointed by how competitive it is between all of the teams, not just some of them, but most of them. And it's all because, I think as well, unlike the Premiership, relegation has its consequences. It's not a situation where if you're relegated, you spend 1 year in the Championship, absolutely destroy the other 11 teams and then come right back up. No, in this relegation, particularly for poor Biarritz, who spent over 7 years in relegation, it has its consequences. And every time a team comes close, I think all the supporters come out for the team and try and fight their corner essentially in the latter half of the season when they they don't want to get relegated. So that's kind of it for Castres 11th. That's just what I'm going to go off. I think as well. They are quite a youthful squad, but they are inexperienced as such, and they don't have as much depth. They especially when Uruguay will have their playoff against either the USA or Canada, and if Erdopelita does actually catch the eye of the Argentinian selectors and gets called up, they could be in trouble because they don't really have a backup kicker. Certainly not one as consistent as he is. So that's just what I'm going to say for Castres. Now, with that in mind, let's move on to... Now, this is actually where it gets a bit complicated. I've made a bit of a switch up just because I did take a look at my predictions and I looked at Lyon and I'm like, actually, I can't do them like that. They're not going to finish 10th. So I actually made a bit of a switch around. I'm not going to bother editing it in my post because that's been up for some time. So coming in 10th is going to be Biarritz Olympique. The other promoted side, they were really lucky, I think, to get into the top 14. They only managed to win in a penalty shootout against Bayonne, fellow Basque countryside or whatever. I remember, if you haven't seen that, go watch it on YouTube. It's actually one of the most entertaining things I've seen in the rugby recently, in the rugby club world, because I've only ever seen a penalty shootout once, and it was, I think, the Leicester Tigers against Cardiff Blues back in, 2008, 2009, 07, one of those years anyway. And it was so unusual. You never see them happen. It's so rare enough to see them happen. So it's always a treat when they do. But you have to feel sorry for the Bayonne. Was it Locke who kicked it? It was one of the forwards, I think, and he just missed it. And then obviously Armitage managed to nail it over. So it's really, it's absolutely gut-wrenching. So Biarritz take Bayonne's place essentially as the Basque Country rugby club. But as I said, obviously they only got in by the skin of their teeth. One thing they do need, and that will help them, especially if their losses are starting to mount up against the wins, they need their vocal supporters. They have some of the most vocal and loud supporters ever, and obviously psychologically that's a huge factor in trying to get a team to win. So hopefully they'll come back, but obviously the COVID situation, depending whether they can actually bring fans back into the stadium. Now, as it stands, I think it can. I saw them anyways at the Pro D2 playoff. And if you take a look at their squad, they have Stefan Armitage, Kuradrani, Thomas Kubeli, the pair from the Western Force, Even James Cronin from Munster, can't help to always have a former Munster player in your squad. So they do have depth, but I can also see with them another Newcastle Falcons nosedive scenario. And if they're anything like the Biarritz team I know from the late 2000s, early 2010s, they might focus too hard on the Challenge Cup because they do enjoy their European rugby, and they're hungry for some European action. They haven't had it since 2013, 2014, so they will take advantage of it. But I mean, we don't know the draw yet, but I think it could be a fatal mistake to do so. Right now, they just need to focus on trying to get up to the Champions Cup spots, which I do think they have the potential to do at some point, but just not this season. The one thing they can benefit from that can get them up to 10th rather than stick around with Perpignan in relegation zone is they can gain with the international window, because a lot of their players are seasoned, but they do during the international window. Obviously, a lot of the big teams lose their players, but that's where Biarritz can be dangerous. Maybe get some crucial deciding wins against each of them. But that's all I have to say about that. I do think think 10th is a fair spot for Biarritz. They're not going to have an amazing season, but not a bad one either. And that's, I suppose, that's all I have to say about them. They're a relatively unknown team to me. Haven't watched them in quite some time, and I'm curious to see what type of rugby they play, and whether they'll be a team who will stick around in the top 14, return to their glory days. Because I remember back in the days, like 2006, the Heineken Cup final, obviously they lost to Munster. Lost again in 2010. They won a Challenge Cup in 2012. Not too far away, if you think about it, given where they have been for quite some time in the Pro D2. But yeah, they were a big squad back in the day. A bit of a, if you want to go to football terms, a bit of a Leeds United. They had a golden era about 10 or so years ago before they got promoted back. Well, Leeds had to wait nearly 20 years to get promoted back. Well, the Biarritz just strike me as one of those teams. They had a golden era, and now we could be on the cusp of something just as good, if not better. They still probably have a grudge to try and win a Heineken Cup after being in the final twice. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Biarritz. So now we're going to move on to 9th. Following the switch is Stade Francais. Stade Francais, obviously, they're a side who just about managed to scrape a quarter-final, or it's kind of a quarter-final, the 6 teams in it though, quarter-final playoff against Racing last season, which was, I suppose, a huge turnaround from the previous season, because the cancelled season, 2019-20, they finished last. They were in 14th, even below Agen, who, as we know, managed to lose all 26 games last season and were doomed for relegation probably by November. That was an incredible turnaround from, Gonzalo Quesada, Argentinian head coach or something like that. I think he only came into it and managed to bring them from a nearly relegated team, very lucky the season got cancelled because obviously they would be relegated, to getting a Champions Cup, not only a Champions Cup spot but a playoff, which they unfortunately lost to Racing 92. They are kind of an up and down team in general though. They won the top 14 back in 2015, so 6 years ago. They won the Challenge Cup back in 2017. That was obviously a big achievement, but unfortunately in that season, despite being the champions, they managed to lose to Krasnoyar, a Russian Siberian team, I think, from Krasnoyarsk, which I suppose is a bit of an embarrassing scenario. Fair play to Krasnoyar getting a win against the current champions. That must have been some huge achievement for a mainly like a Russian club, but probably amateur as well. I'm not really sure if they're pro or not. But one thing that the reason I think Stade Francais will go from 6th last season to 9th, just missing out on a Champions Cup spot, is they have lost quite a few players. They've lost Gaël Ficou, their French international, try-scoring machine, really. He's gone over to Racing 92. They managed to swoop him up. They lost the former Argentinian skipper, Pablo Matera, but also Jonathan Dante. Now, if you don't know who Jonathan Dante is, he was one of the more seasoned players. I think he started back there in 2011, and he's got over 100 match points or so, which is impressive. in any sense of the word. I mean, now if you don't know who Jonathan Dante is, he was the centre for Stade Francais since 2011. I think he got 130 points in over 180 starts. So the point is that he can score, and he's a well-seasoned player for Stade Francais. And anytime you lose one of those, it can have some dire consequences, because you need Europe then playing with a player who might have less experience, certainly. Fiku, Matera, and Dante, that's a trio of really good players who they've lost over the last few months. But they did get Ngani Laumape from the Hurricanes, and might I say, in Super Rugby out there, himself and Peter Umaga Jensen were a really good centre partnership. Certainly, Laumape got a good few tries where he was just charged through, which is something that Stade Francais can use to their advantage. Obviously, when you look at their out halves, they have Nicolas Sanchez as the big name that screams to mind. I mean, the Argentinian out half who got, I believe, I think he managed to get all of Argentina's points over that win against New Zealand 25-15, wasn't it? So that obviously Nicolas Sanchez, even without that, he still needs no introduction. He's a fantastic out half, world class, definitely. But even without him, even when he's gone on the internationals, they have a young Jar Segons. And if you don't know who Segons is, I believe he was fourth among the top 5 point scorers, or in the top 5 anyways, which that's really good. Definitely. A very consistent kicker. So even when Sanchez is gone, they could fall back on him after he amassed that record. The one thing I will say about Stade Francais is their wins are very marginal, but so are their losses. So that obviously has its advantages and disadvantages. Like, they managed to only win 31-28 over Brive. Somehow they managed to lose to Pau, although not by much. And even if they did lose, the thing that did help them scrape 70 points or get up to 70 point match points is they got a lot of losing bonus points, as well as 4 try points. But the losing bonus points certainly seem to add up and manage to get them to a playoff, which is something they need to do. Obviously the marginal wins and losses, they come with advantages and disadvantages, like I said. But if they keep that up, they certainly can finish a bit higher than 9th. But the one thing is, their form has been dipping over time, certainly. I mean, even in their playoff against Racing 92, they conceded 4 tries in the second half. And I believe, they conceded 4 tries in the second half. I mean, that's not good at all. That just shows that their defence can be caught off guard. And I do remember watching it. It did look like their defence, like they were allowing spaces and allowing Racing to get in. Another thing that might cause Stade Francais' top 14 campaign to fluctuate is the fact that they're now back in the Champions Cup, and they got a decent draw. I mean, against Connacht and Bristol. Obviously, Bristol are now a big team in the English Premiership, but even Connacht, as much as I love Connacht to win as a supporter, it's just I think Stade Francais have the upper hand now, and they could, if they get a win against Connacht, they might try harder to get one against Bristol and get into the round of 16. So it just all depends, obviously, for most French teams, how they're going to look at their European campaign, and will they put more towards it than their domestic season. So Stade Francais finishing 9th, that's exactly where I see them. I'm confident enough in that prediction, if I'm actually being honest, certainly more than the Castres Olympique one. The Stade Francais have been a middling team, going from lower half of the table to get, just about getting a Heineken Cup spot. Obviously, the 2015 Top 14 Championship and finishing dead last in the 2019-20 season, they're huge exceptions, and just shows how they can be one of the most unpredictable teams in the Top 14, and certainly this season could be no exception. So I'm going to move on from Stade Francais, and we're going to move to the last team in the lower half of the table, as well as being the first team to, as it stands, obviously, if the Champions Cup remains at 8 teams for the top 14, is Lyon Olympique Union. So I swapped this, obviously. I said they'd finish 10th. I said Stade Francais would finish 8th, and I said Biarritz would finish 9th. So I switched that all around now. So Lyon in 8th, I think I'm happy I made this change, because they're, they've been knocking on the door recently. I mean, in that same 2019-20 cancelled season, they finished in 2nd, and they haven't won the top 14 or French championship since 1933. They haven't even won one in this generation or in this century. So, they have been knocking on the door of winning something big. One of the things as well is, of all the French teams to not take European rugby that seriously, Lyon have to take the cake, because in their Champions Cup season 2 years ago, they lost to Benetton, Leinster and Northampton. And that just kind of shows that you're like, the top 14 probably pays us more, and that's what we've been trying to win, because that same season is when they finished second. So it's clear to me that they don't really value European rugby as well as Castres or Biarritz or any of the other teams. And previously, before that, like, they'd been an up and down team in the Pro League too, so they've really come into their own in recent seasons. They have obviously some really impressive players. Now, one of the things that really concern me is they can have shortcomings. I mean, they only beat Agen by 1 point. I think it was like 13-12 final score. They were the closest to losing to Agen, definitely. I watched the highlights from that, and Agen were just simply unlucky they couldn't get their first win against Lyon. So that makes them slightly unpredictable. However, they do have some really good players. I mean, they have Joshua Tuisova. He was, I think, among the top try scorers last season. He managed to get eight tries. That's a really good record. They have Romain Taufifnu, who had previously been at Toulon, and then before that Racing 92. But their biggest signing of the whole transfer window is Lima Sopoaga. A very consistent kicker. He was really good at Highlanders. He did even better at Wasps. And I'm curious to know how he will do in the top 14, along with all the other kickers, Jamin Jalabert and Tamak and all them. I will be watching Sopoaga. They're in the Challenge Cup this season. They didn't get a Champions Cup, which, as I said, it doesn't matter. They don't usually take European rugby as seriously anymore. One of the underdogs in their team who deserves a lot more credit for how he performed last season, managed to get 8 tries as well, is Nakai Taki. I believe I'm pronouncing that. Noah Nakai Taki. He's from France. He was really good last season. I'm curious to see will he try and do just as well this season, matching up with Sopoaga and Joshua Tuisova. They also have in their pack, they have Matthew Bastereau returning from New York last season, as well as Dylan Creighton. Now, Bastereau, I think, is kind of past his best, but even still, he's got experience and he's certainly got the aggression they might need in their pack. So, Lyon, I think, was it the Rugby Graphic was saying, shout out to him, one of my favourite rugby designing for the rugby player cards. He was saying that he thinks Lyon will win the whole thing. I mean, that's a huge prediction for me. Huge prediction for him, sorry. But for me, no. I don't think they're going to win it. I don't even think they're going to get a playoff spot. I think they're going to finish just outside the top half of the table, but getting a Champions Cup spot. Albeit barely. It'll be between themselves and Stade Francais, in my opinion, as to who gets it. Between themselves, Stade Francais and Montpellier, they're going to be between the lower mid-table between Champions Cup and losing out and getting a Challenge Cup spot instead. So that's all I really have to say about Lyon. I'm excited to see them. They're one team I've been watching, and they do play an entertaining style of rugby, but I still have yet to fully immerse myself in the type of rugby they play. And hopefully they can get their fans back as well, because surely that success hasn't gone unnoticed in Lyon. I know they're mainly a football city with Olympique Lyon, but the rugby team has been doing really well as well, so let's just hope so. But my only fear with Lyon is possibly, with obviously finishing second last season, is they could have peaked a bit too early, peaked before they won anything, which, that's an awful situation to find yourself in, because you're coming so close and yet so far. That peak too early speculation is, for me, that's with another team that we'll mention later on. But as it stands, I'm going to predict Lyon for 8th. That'll be it for the lower half of the table. Now we're going to move into the top half of the table. And coming in at number 7th, we have Montpellier. So, if you remember from last season, we did a bit of a news story on Montpellier, and let's just say that they had a rocky season. The first half of the season wasn't terrible, it was abysmal. 3 out of 14 games won at that stage. 13th, but one of the biggest. I think the club was worth 27 million, in terms of their wages and player salaries. how could Montpellier have fallen so low to that position? I have no idea. It just came out of nowhere, and the fact that they somehow managed to turn that season around, salvage what they could, and get a trophy out of that season. I mean, they got the Challenge Cup trophy. Came as such a shock to me. I mean, if that's not the biggest comeback in one whole season, I have no idea what is. So hats off to Montpellier. I do. They've earned respect for me for doing something like that, and hopefully they can be an inspiration to others, possibly in the top 14. Realizing that the first half of the season can be bad. How are we going to turn it around? So I'll put them in 7th. I think that's a fair spot. The Challenge Cup, obviously, winning that will be a huge moral booster. I've never really liked Montpellier in that sense. I try to remain as neutral as possible when doing like games and focus and analysis. Obviously, we all know I'm a Connacht fan at this stage. I made that pretty clear early on, but in terms of I've kind of, you'll notice I've kind of died down on doing like being biased towards Connacht, because I want to be a neutral. I want to try and see things from all points of view, and look at what each team has to offer, strengths and weaknesses. Even teams I don't like, such as maybe Leinster, or Eastern rivals, or Saracens because they cheated. I have to try and look at them in a sense that, okay, what do they have to offer? What exactly is so good about this club, and can I get behind them, or can I, in some way, shape or form, talk about the positive aspects of them and talk about what they bring to the game of rugby. So Montpellier are no exception to that. I have to do that as well. One thing that I will say, though, is they've made some really good signings. I mean, Paolo Garabisi from Benetton, a Rainbow Cup winner, they brought him in. They also still have Handré Pollard. So I kind of like the way they do that. They have a Northern Hemisphere and a Southern Hemisphere kicker. So when Garabisi's gone to the Six Nations, Pollard should be able to play. And when Pollard's gone to the Rugby Championship, Garabisi can play. So they have two really strong and reliable kickers. I really like that. I mean, Garabisi, if there was one Italian player in the Six Nations that deserved an award, it was him, because he was fairly consistent. Certainly compared to Stephen Bradley, is it? The scrum half? Not really too sure. Probably getting his name wrong. But yeah, so they have him. They managed to swipe Dumareu from La Rochelle. He was essential to La Rochelle's success in the last season, or near success, if you want to say that. Even Boitier, Arthur Vincent, and Mohamed Hayos, in the pack. He was a very heavy player. He needs to work on his discipline, though. I think not just for France, but for Montpellier, he does get a few yellow cards. They have lost a few players, obviously. They've lost Bismarck Duplessis, and the other Duplessis is Jean-Luc, I think. No, sorry, Jean-Luc, I think, is at Sharks. So they've lost two Duplessis, anyways, I'm trying to pronounce it right. Johan Goosen, also gone, so they're losing a few of their South Africans. And Alex Lozowski, he was on loan from Saracens to them, and now he's gone back. So he'll be sorely missed. But they've brought in a few, and they've brought out a few, same as any team, and they're trying they're in a rebuilding phase, I think. Montpellier, they've had a disastrous first half season, had a pretty decent second half to the season, and they're trying to reshape themselves to become a top team again. They haven't been a top team for a while. I've kind of seen them as a mid-tabler, middle to lower mid-table, dabbling in and out of Challenge and Champions Cup, and that's just how they are right now. And we could see them in the top half. We could see them in the playoff positions, maybe even this season. I mean, I have them in 7th. That's one outside a playoff position, so it's not a million miles away, is what I'm saying. I'll be curious to watch how Montpellier do, though. I think a few of our followers have said that Montpellier have the potential to once again take a huge nosedive, but I just don't see that happen. Certainly not as bad as last season. Last season was at a critical level. The only reason they weren't in last was because Agen were just out of their depth in the top 14. They had been for some time, and yeah, that's pretty much it for Montpellier. So I put them at 7th, a fair position, and I'll be curious to see how they go. So now we're going to enter the top 6. These are the really important positions now, because these are the playoffs. We have first and second go into the semi-finals, and third all the way to 6th are kind of in a quarter-final playoff position. Not really quarter-final, but just a playoff towards the semi-final. So we're starting with them, and I have one of the big four in, or Les Quatre Grands, as I kind of call them, and that is Toulon. If you don't know who Les Quatre Grands are, they're kind of the clubs that are always nearly contesting a top 14 title and winning it, and even are doing bits in the European scene, winning Champions Cups and Challenge Cups. So the Les Quatre Grands, or the big four for me, are Toulon, Toulouse, Clermont, and Racing 92. Obviously, your La Rochelles and your Bordeaux, your SFPs, they come and go. But these are the 4 clubs that are really consistent. They obviously have, like all teams, they have their declining phase, and they have like kind of a recession as such for a rugby club. Like for example, back in 2016-17, that wasn't a great period for Toulouse, I believe, or 2015, around that sort of year, when Toulon were doing really well. I do remember at the same time Toulouse were kind of in the lower end near the Challenge Cup, and it looked like a fallen giant. But as we all know, giants rise up again, The harder the fall, the stronger the comeback, as I say. But anyways, going back to this, so 6, we have Toulon. Toulon are a team that have really interested me. Obviously, they had a really golden period from 2012 to 2015. They won 3 Champions Cups in a row. Never been done before, never been done since. It can be, obviously, I could see 1 or 2 teams anyways doing it. But, Toulon are the only ones to do so, and that is incredible. They're also in a rebuilding stage from the golden era. Obviously, they have the seasoned French captain Charles Olivon on their team, face of a leader, really, and a really strong guy. Just for some stats, out of the Big 4, they made the fewest average meters in a game in 2021. Out of the Big 4, they had only 310 meters averaging per game, which it is kind of weak in general, not just in the Big 4. If you want your average meters should kind of be between the 370 to 400 if you want to be considered a fast, attacking team, and use a team that turns territory and possession into points, essentially. They're not a fast team. Toulon, I just look at the way they're not used to using their backs to score. They're more using driving mauls because they have a huge, heavy pack. And that is obviously a huge strength, but what it does do is it means they can be slow. But that being said, even though they might be slow in the back and not using their back line as much, they can be creative in loose play. I don't know if you ever saw, but I think it was a Toulon-Toulouse match, or Gabien Villiers managed to, I think it was Louis Carbonell, he managed to chip it exactly just wide to Gabien Villiers. He caught it brilliantly and just scored it in for a try. It was a really good try, possibly one of the best in the top 14 season. They got 64 tries in 2021, which is a decent amount, but compared to the rest of the teams, it is quite low. And they can put their trust in Louis Carbonell. Their out half, had an average kicking rate of 77%, fairly good, fairly spot on. And he's kind of third in line for the French kicking boot. There's a Romain Ntamak, Mathieu Jalabert, and then there's Louis Carbonell. And I do remember watching him back in the under-20 Six Nations. He was really solid, and I think he's managed to maintain and be consistent in that form. And that, obviously I can't wait to see what he'll be like in 1 or 2 years later. Hopefully, maybe he might even get the French jersey. Who knows? He might be contesting it with Ntamak and Jalabert. That being said, obviously, they have, some really strong players. They've bought Quinrue from Connacht, another potential leader if Charles Olivon is on international duty. He's been captain for Connacht a few times, and although at first I was sceptical of him as to why he's in the Ireland squad, why he's doing so well, I do understand now he's got great leadership skills on the field. They've got Leon Nakarawa, Sergio Parise, and Dupree. They have a heavy pack, and that's partly the reason why they're one of the most successful teams on the driving maul. So I think 6th is a fair position for them. I could see them making the playoffs. Winning it or not, I don't think they'll win. Certainly not against the teams I've put in front that they'll potentially face. But I'm curious, Toulon will probably get a Champions Cup spot once again. So 6th, fair position for Toulon. Moving on. Now we go to 5th. This is probably one of my bigger predictions, certainly considering the team I'm talking about. One of my boldest predictions, and hopefully, if I get this right, I'll look like a genius, alright? And that's Racing 92 in 5th. I think they missed their chances back in 2019-20 when they faced Exeter. That was a huge psychological blow when they didn't win. When they once again blew a Champions Cup final, they're tied with Clermont for 3 Champions Cup finals lost. That takes a toll on you eventually, It's hard to, come so close and so far to achieving glory and then just have to get back up and start the whole process over again. I can't imagine. Obviously, another big loss is they've lost Simon Zebo, absolutely savage player when I was seeing even at Munster and later at Racing 92. He was just really, really good. They have Finn Russell, obviously. He's the big man to talk about. They're out half. And he'll be gone. Not only will he be gone on Scottish duty, but I think it was Brian O'Driscoll and Ronan O'Gara, or one of the two anyways, and off the ball, they were saying he has the potential to get a team to win by 20 points or lose by 20 points. He can be on and off as such for an out half, even though we saw on the lines, once he came on for Dan Bigger, he was fantastic. But that was because he was A, well rested, and B, he was, raring to go for a game, and prove, you should have started me instead of Bigger, who went off injured. He went out on a really low ebb. So he is kind of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of kicker, but when he does play, he plays the most. He plays some really fantastic rugby. I mean, obviously we saw his nutmeg against Munster. I mean, that's just skill you just don't see as much. But even if they don't have Finn Russell, he's gone for Scotland. They have Ben Volavola, the Fijian out half, also very, very good. I haven't seen him since the Rugby World Cup. I didn't get to watch the New Zealand and Fijian matches, so I'm curious to see if he's still got that. If he's still the player I remember him to be. Anyways, Luke Jones and Leroux, two locks, savage. I think Racing had one of the highest success rates in the lineup, possibly the highest of the big four, certainly one of the highest in the top 14. And so they have, with Jones and Leroux, two very tall guys and dominating in the lineup. They could definitely use that. And obviously one of the biggest things is they managed to steal Gaël Fickou from Stade Francais. He'll obviously, another player, the problem with Racing is what I have, obviously it's a bold prediction to make the fifth, is they have so many French players. I think out of all the top 14 teams, they're the ones who, Racing 92 contribute the most French players. I mean, you got Teddy Thomas, you got Gaël Fickou, you got, you just have loads of French players. Bao Bigny is another one, and come the Six Nations time, I have seen it back in 2018. That's when they did falter because they were losing so many internationals. Same with any team, but them in particular because they're contributing the most, and they will likely have some sort of depth. I mean, they have Juan Imhoff, Kurtley Beale, in the back three. I could see the back three being for next season. Anyways, Juan Imhoff, Teddy Thomas, and Kurtley Beale. That would be a solid back three, and I can't wait to see what they'll do. They'll play some really skillful, fast-paced rugby, and so that's basically it for Racing. But as I said, they could keep losing out in the international window, and that's why I have them fifth. This is a small step back for them, anyways. I do think it's not like they're on the downturn. I do think next season I might rate them higher, particularly if they come higher than fifth. I won't be underestimating them again. Because if any Racing fan was listening to this, it'd be like, why have you got my team in fifth? They're always trying to win the top 14, always trying to win the Champions Cup. Yeah, they're always trying, but they're nearly always failing. Alright? So anyways, now we're moving into the top four and a fourth. Another bold prediction, especially with the Irish fans who love this team simply because Ronan O'Gara is in charge, is La Rochelle. So, the thing about La Rochelle is, I'm not going to underestimate Rog. Very good coach, certainly managed to turn them around. But La Rochelle have their periods where they just don't do so well. You might think that this was the first time in years that they managed to come in second, possibly ever. No, they managed to come first back in 2015-16 or 16-17. So it's not like before Rog they were a mediocre team. Well, they kind of were, but they had their moments, is what I'm saying. They did peak every now and then fall back down towards the mid to lower half of the table. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen this season, but I mean, blowing both finals just kind of shows really that when they are playing a huge game, they tend to falter. At no point in the top 14 final, when I was watching the highlights, did it look like La Rochelle were, they were going to fight their way into this. Even in the Champions Cup, you just saw Toulouse were always dominating, and even if it wasn't Toulouse, I wonder if it was someone else like Bordeaux or Racing 92, you'd make me wonder, are La Rochelle a Mayo GA? I mean, no, anyone outside Ireland who is not really going to know who Mayo are or why. Are they a team who always gets to the final and just somehow, somewhere, they just lose the run on themselves? Possibly. I have no idea. I mean, they have won a Challenge Cup final, but let's be honest, that's the Challenge Cup. They're better than that now. They're contesting the higher trophies, and it'd be a shame, after all this time, if they were to get there next season and not win anything. You just want them to win a trophy, similar to kind of Clermont and Racing now at this stage. I kind of want them to win the Champions Cup. They've been there a few times in the final, and French teams, despite the fact that Toulouse and Toulon have dominated, only 3 French teams have won a Champions Cup. So despite the fact that they are nearly always in the final stages, it's generally unless it's those two teams are Brive managed to win it one year. The other teams have managed to lose away. But come on, I'm going a bit off topic now. But let's go back to La Rochelle. So, do have a solid squad. I mean, they have Botia, Jules Plisson in the Higher West. When Jules Plisson was playing, he brought up the kicking rate of La Rochelle. But when Ohio West was on, he brought it down. And even when I was watching Ohio West in the semi-finals against Leinster, it was just something I was not completely struck on him. He just seemed a bit off, you know. I mean, he missed a few kicks, I think, and I just wasn't confident in his kicking. And they have Kerr Barlow as well, but I think the problem with Kerr Barlow is similar to the Italian scrum half. I think he's passing a bit too fast and a bit too deep, and especially when they're on the attack, it might put the team out of sync and slow down their attack. Anyways, they are great. They do have two great defensive fullbacks, Dylan Lades and Bryce Dulin. Obviously, we know Dulin. He was a game saver for France in the Six Nations, but then the following week he blew it. But even still, like that aside, they're really good fullbacks, really reliable for the tackling and all that. So I definitely would be keeping an eye on for them. They have Borgart, got 8 tries, and he's a hooker, so that's really good for him. That just also shows that they, like Toulon, they're a big fan of using the driving mauls to get tries, and and Gregory Eldred obviously is a captain, a really experienced kind of leader. They have an unusual squad, but it's a good squad. Like, you put them all together, La Rochelle, and they play a really interesting game, and their team, you can really get behind as well. Certainly. I think they're every Irish rugby fan supports them, A, because of Ronan O'Gara, and B, on top of that, because they're a sort of underdog type of team, and they were a real dark horse in the Champions Cup last season. But they caught a few people off guard. They certainly caught Leinster off guard. I think was it Leo Cullen was saying we won't underestimate La Rochelle, but they did, and they lost. So that just goes to show that they were a dark horse last season, but everybody's going to be on the watch now when they see La Rochelle. So that sort of attack them by surprise scenario in the top 14 and the Champions Cup can be gone. So I think 4th is a fair position. Can they get to the semi-finals? Possibly. Depends who they face. If this is the case, I think it's usually 4th versus 5th. They'd be facing Racing 92, and I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I've rated La Rochelle higher, but when it comes down to Racing and La Rochelle playing, I'm not 100% sure. I'm curious now to see if that will be the case, and if they do, I'll have to give my prediction on that. That's another video anyways. So coming in 3rd, and this is a prediction I have huge confidence in, is Bordeaux Begles. I mean, they were Champions Cup semi-finalists last year, even semi-finalists in the top 14. For ages now, Bordeaux Begles have been knocking on the door of winning something huge. Because if you remember in 2019-2020, in that top 14 season, they were top of the table and they were dominating. I really did think Bordeaux Begles were going to win their first top 14 that season, or at top 14. I'm not sure if it'd be their first. They may. I think they're a combination of two Bordeaux clubs, and I think one of them did win some French championships. But anyways, entirely different type of team. They also have one of the most exciting out-halves in the world of rugby right now. Also one of the most underrated is Mathieu Jalabert. He really did step up to the mark when Ntamak was injured in the Six Nations. It was between him and Sexton as to who I was putting in my team of the year. Certainly, because he really, it's not an easy boots to fill. I mean, Ntamak at that stage was already a superstar, and Jalabert was this relatively unknown French fly half, and he managed to get, in 10 games for Bordeaux alone, he got 147 points, so 14.7 points per average game. That's pretty good for an out half, I'm not going to lie. I am really excited if he can keep up that momentum next season and become possibly the top point scorer for them, but that only depends if the French team want him back. Then obviously they'll have someone else come in. And even if you look beyond him in the squad, you have Santiago Cordero for Argentina, Ben Lam, and the good thing about Ben Lam is, since he's New Zealand, and New Zealand don't pick players outside the Super Rugby 5, he'll be there always, as long as he doesn't get injured, of course. And he was always good at finding the space and sidestepping people. Ben Lam, he's an exciting player to watch, and a really, really tactical signing from Bordeaux. Cameron Wokey, Jefferson Poirot is the captain. He was obviously doing a good job, and he can do that. And Romain Tafif-Nua, definitely very solid in the pack. I did think one thing that really struck my eye was they fought better against Toulouse in the semi-final than La Rochelle did in the final. They only lost because they're disciplined, which is something that it's not unique to that game. They have the potential to be a bit ill-disciplined at times, getting a few yellow cards. I think they were among the top teams to get yellow cards last season. They gave it, but it wasn't a yellow. They got a red against Toulouse in the semi-final, and it cost them the game. I think they lost 24-21. They lost. Essentially, they lost, but they came incredibly close, and it would have been really interesting to see if La Rochelle and Bordeaux were in the final. And if you ask me, I think it would have been Bordeaux who would have won that, not La Rochelle, as many people might predict. I just have huge confidence in Bordeaux. I do think, they do deserve to win something. Like, they get into the beating Racing and getting into the Champions Cup game is a huge shock, and it kind of shows who's on the up, which is Bordeaux, and who's on the down, which is Racing. And yeah, I just they have one of the best line-out wins, 89%. That's obviously a huge factor now when we're talking about it. Like, they can with that, like, if their line-outs is one of the best, and Jalabert should always be he can take the penalties if he wants, but he should have confidence in the line-out to kick down to touch and try and get a mauling drive for a try. In most of the games I know. They also managed to get Francois Trandu in case Jalabert is gone on international duty. Obviously, he's slightly older, but he's still really good out half nonetheless. And they have Joseph Dweba. I remember him for the Cheetahs. He was one of the top try scorers of the season, like the COVID season, as I call it, 2019-20, before it got cancelled. So, and Dweba, and I'm curious to know, will he maintain that momentum for Bordeaux? So. I have Bordeaux Begles in third. I do think that they could potentially be a finalist. Certainly, I hope they do. I love to see Bordeaux win something, especially if it's up against Toulouse. Like, it'll be like a David Goliath scenario. And yeah, I mean, third is a lot of people will hopefully now start to agree with me when realizing that I'm not actually being sensationalist about them. I'm actually spitting facts, what I'd be saying, but not just that, but actually giving some context to it and why they would finish as high as third. So yeah, third place for Bordeaux is fine. And now we move into the top two. This is not necessarily the runner-up in the championship and the champions, not championship, but who I think would actually finish second in the table and who would finish first. As I said, I'm going to do like a short video on once we have our top six on who will win in each playoff. So coming up at number second is Clermont Auvergne. One of the best kicking rates of the season at 79%. And obviously they have one of the top, I think he was second in terms of, after Antoine Hastoy in terms of top point scorers, 247 points. I think Camille Lopez, fantastic kicker and really underrated for Clermont. And they're building up a solid squad. I mean, they have Raka and they have Kotaro Matsushima in the back line. I mean, we all know how unreal Matsushima is for Japan, but even in the Champions Cup, he only signed on late in the season, and already he was, starting for Clermont and getting tries and beating the opposition, and I think he was really good at the handoffs as well. He's a strong Japanese player. But anyways, they do play a high octane, high scoring games. I think Clermont were amongst the, I think of the top four. I think they're one of the higher scoring teams, in games. Like, they'll win games and they win them with, which will be good for the 4-try bonus points. They like to go for tries, and they like to, unlike some other teams, they like to, even if they were to allow the opposition to score just as much, as long as they outscore them rather than outscore them and outpace them rather than defending it, put up a solid defense against them. But they do put up a solid defense against them. But yeah, that's just what I'm going to say, is that those 4-try bonus points, and even if they were to lose, they'll likely get that and the losing bonus point, they'll all add up over time, bringing them high up the table, even if it looks like they're not getting as many wins as, say, Bordeaux or Toulouse. One of the faster teams, definitely one of the fastest teams on the field, 428 average metres per game in 2021, highest among the big four, and that just goes to show that in comparison to Toulon, who play a slow game using the bulk of their pack to try and maul from a line out and get tries, they like to just pass it out the wing find the space and find the gaps and then just offload it. I think they were pretty high for offloads as well, so that just goes to show. And Sebastian Bosey and Morgan Parra as well. Sebastian Bezzi and Morgan Parra. I mean, Morgan Parra needs no introduction. So they have a variety of combinations, along with Lopez, and made huge signings over the last. I mean, they already had Damien Pinot, Moala, and Fofana, but they also have JJ Hanrahan from Munster. He was among the top point scorers in the Pro 14, so you're getting experience. I mean, and then you have Tomas Lavanini. He can link up with Timani in the pack, and be solid in the scrums. Obviously, he got a bit of criticism because he's a slightly ill-disciplined player, but I think ever since he went to Leicester Tiger and worked with Steve Borthwick, he's become better. He's become not less of a causing trouble in the field and trying to rile up the other team. He actually can play really good rugby. Very good at the tackling. He's gotten way better at tackling. I remember, and mainly a lot of his tackles were high, and that was a thing that he was criticised for. He couldn't tackle, but now he's gotten really good at it. But as I said, you have Lopez, Hanrahan, Bezzi, and Parra. You have any number of combinations there to make for a halfback pair. So that's all I'm going to say about Clermont. I mean, they're a fantastic team. But one, just like I think I mentioned earlier in the video, Biarritz, they need their fans back. If you've ever seen the Stade Marcel Michelin in an average match day, it usually fills out to about 16,000 fans. I'm not sure the capacity. It's like 16 to 18,000. And they are the loudest fans possibly in the world of rugby, not just in the top 14. And that's a huge factor. I mean, opposition teams like Leinster and Saracens and Leicester Tigers, when they go over to play Clermont, they really struggle to get results because their fans are absolutely insane. If there are Clermont fans watching, just know that you're legends. Honestly, you make so much noise and you just manage to create such a huge atmosphere. I'd love to go over there to Auvergne at some point and go to a Clermont match, because it's just a sea of yellow and blue of Les Janas or Les Vulcans or whatever they're called. And I'd love to be amongst them and just get that match day experience. It's probably a unique experience only to Clermont. I know obviously, even when I go to Galway, Connacht fans, they're the stadium may be small, but it feels like it has 40 or 50,000 just by the noise. But there's something unique about Clermont in just how absolutely crazy and how absolutely insane the atmosphere is. So, if they can get the fans back and get a good lot of them in, that will be a huge psychological motivating factor for Clermont to really do well in games and make the Michelin a fortress, essentially. And yeah, so I have Clermont for second. Could they win it? I kind of hope so. I mean, I want them to win the Champions Cup as well, but I highly doubt they can win both in the season. It's one or the other, not both. And I hope they don't do a sort of divide and conquer scenario, because it'll only backfire on them and they'll only end up winning nothing, I think. I just think the way the Champions Cup format is going around now is it could be hard, and it could pin the toughest against the weakest, and I don't know, I think maybe Clermont should postpone their ambitions of winning a Champions Cup for now until they get the usual format back in, so that they can finish top of their pool and get a decent quarter-final or round of 16 draw, whatever. I just think this season, focus on the top 14. It's been a good few years since you've won your last one. Try and do this now, and you'll be going up against an up and on the rise Bordeaux Begles team, a Toulouse team who are playing some of the best years of their rugby, and it's going to be intense. I can't wait to see that. And number one of the list, not surprisingly, because you've all seen it, and hey, Toulouse, essentially the kings of Europe. 5 European titles under them, multiple, I think 21 top 14 titles. They're the most decorated rugby club in the world, because they played this World Club Championship and something and won it twice. So, and they've won loads of Coupe de France, but that's a different generation. But even what I'm saying is, they are the definition of a sort of Real Madrid or AC Milan, Real Madrid or PSG in rugby. Honestly, they have money, they have fans, they have an absolute mouth-watering squad, if I say so, or just a savage squad stacked with internationals and experience. Even if I was to name a squad, I mean, you have Dupont Entimac, Santiago Chacobaras from Argentina, Peter Aki, Bundy's brother, Cheslin Colby, Julien Marchand, Francois Crowe, Elstat, Cyril Bile. They have so many. It's actually kind of ridiculous how savage this squad is. Tim Nanai Williams was their key signing. I might do a video now on each club's key signing, but they got Nanai Williams, and even in Super Rugby, he was insane. And obviously you know that they play a fast style of rugby similar to that of Racing and Clermont. They had the most offloads, averaging 11 per game, meaning that teams just struggle to, once they crack through the defence, that's it. They're running in tries. Tries they'll always find the offload, and they're incredible for doing that. I mean, they have a huge backline. I mean, it's insane. Most tackles made by any team, meaning that they just don't attack. They also know how to defend, and I think they have some of the best They had one of the best goal line defences in the Champions Cup. La Rochelle were knocking on the door for quite a while. They're into a new era of rugby. Toulouse. That's just it. They have some of the biggest history. I mean, they won the first 2 Heineken Cups. They went through a period where they kind of didn't win anything, other teams won. Particularly, as I said, in 2015, 2016, they were kind of in the Challenge Cup, not exactly where they want to be. But since they got DuPont and Entomac, they've brought themselves back up into the big leagues. I mean, I really want to see a Club World Cup match, and I'm really curious just to see, are Toulouse the best club in the world? Because right now it does seem like they are. Even as dominant as Crusaders might be, they still managed to let Blues win their first Super Rugby title since 2003, so they're not completely perfect, and neither are Toulouse. Toulouse can falter, definitely. I mean, you saw that during the regular season in top 14, they managed to lose to Castres 26-24. So all big teams like Leinster and Toulouse and Exeter, they can be beaten. They can have their off days, and they can allow a small team to take advantage of that and just triumph, and it obviously looks embarrassing on them, but they're seldom, and the bigger the fall, the stronger the comeback, as I said earlier in the video. But yeah, so Toulouse for number 1, best odds to win the top 14. I mean, there's nothing more I can really say about Toulouse. I mean, we all know their history, we all know how great they are, and I think once this is all over, we're in a new era for Toulouse. I wonder how many trophies they'll have, how many top 14s in Champions Cup. I mean, they did a double this season. Could they do another double this season and the season after that? And who's going to be the team that gets a result over them? Because any team who can get a result against this Toulouse side deserves a trophy alone. It's like beating the Crusaders in Super Rugby. I always thought there should be a separate trophy created just for doing that, because that is a huge achievement for any team. So yeah, Toulouse in first, and that's all I have to say about that. And so if I just go back through the list, so obviously 14th Section Pole A, 13th Brive, 12th USA Perpignan, 11th Castres Olympique, 10th Biarritz Olympique, 9th Stade Francais, 8th Lyon, 7th Montpellier, 6th Toulon, 5th Racing 92, 4th La Rochelle, 3rd Bordeaux Begles, 2nd Clermont Auvergne, and 1st Stade Toulouse or Toulouse. So that's it for my top 14 predictions. I hope you guys enjoy them. I know as I said, I'm sure there are other podcasts that will go into a more in-depth experience, but we're already over an hour in this thing. So if I was to do that I think I did it for some teams, but if I was to do that for every team, this would go on longer, and I'd definitely lose my voice by then. But yeah, this was just a try. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully I raised your eyebrows for a few of my picks and explained why, and gave context so that you could say, I understand. And I'm sure a few of you guys will listen and be like, no, you're full of shit. And maybe I am. But only time will tell whether I'm actually a genius or whether I don't know how to predict things. I'm just like the Irish guy from HITC. But I ain't getting a tattoo of Patrick Bamford on my leg, alright? Or getting a tattoo of any rugby player. Who would be the best rugby player to get a tattoo on their leg? Probably Matthew Bastareaud, just because he's Matthew Bastareaud. So, obviously at the as I kept mentioning throughout the video, I'm gonna do another video where I react to my predictions and just see, how many did I get right, if any, and also do another predictions for the postseason playoffs, and just which will be easier, I think, because I'll see the type of rugby they play, and we'll obviously know then what teams are in the top 6, as well as should be easier to know who will beat who and who will come out on top as 2021-22 top 14 champions. So And as I said, this won't be the only video I'll do. I'll do predictions maybe for the Premiership once it starts, and the URC whenever I get fixtures. That's just hoping the URC now release fixtures at some stage, because I mean we're in mid to late August. We're in mid-August, and you know, we still have yet to confirm that, even though the Premiership and Top 14 have released theirs like 2 weeks ago, so, or 2 or 3 weeks ago now at this stage. So they need to get a move on with that. But once I do, I'll make predictions on them and the Champions Challenge Cup. So predictions videos will definitely be a thing. I'll make videos on, you know, I might do a review of the Lions Tour. Might explain my Rugby World Cup qualification process a bit more, because my map and the text might be a bit hard to understand. So anyways, that'll be it for it, guys. Be sure to subscribe. Hit the notification bell button so that you don't miss another video when I do upload. Can't guarantee when I will upload, but obviously if you have the bell button, you'll know, you know. And yeah, give us a like. Let us know down in the comments what your predictions are from 1 to 14, or let me know which ones am I totally wrong on, so that I can take it on board and know for next time. And I'm curious to know your opinions on it, you know, who will win, so, and who will come into the Champions Cup and Challenge Cup. So I'm going to leave it at that. We're in overtime, so thank you very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video and or enjoyed the listening to it, and I will see you all later.